Now, that's the good news. Let me give you the bad news that you also know. And that is, today in the White House, we have perhaps the worst and most dangerous president in the history of our country. And we also have, not to be forgotten, extreme right-wing leadership in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. Now, what I find particularly disgraceful about Trump is not just his reactionary economic, environmental, and social policies, or the fact that he lies all the time. What I find beyond belief is his incredible hypocrisy. This is a man who ran for president telling the people of this country that he was going to stand up for the working class, that he was going to stand up to the political and economic establishment. And then, once he got elected, and without a second's hesitation, he brings more billionaires into his administration than any president in history. And he hires the former president of Goldman Sachs to be his chief economic advisor. And then 4 months within his administration, he pushes some of the most destructive pieces of legislation in the modern history of our country, legislation that will cause intense suffering and pain for millions of working-class families. Mr. Trump, do not tell us that you are a friend of the working class when you propose to throw 23 million Americans off of health care. Don't tell us that you care about working families when you want to cut Medicaid by over $800 billion, when you want to raise premiums for older workers in a very dramatic way, and when you tell, Mr. Trump, 2.5 million women in this country that they no longer have the option of getting their health care at Planned Parenthood. President Trump, spare us the lies and the hypocrisy. Don't tell us that you are a friend of working families when you propose devastating cuts to Head Start, child care, public education, when you make it harder for working class kids to get a college education because of massive cuts in the Pell Grant program. Don't tell us that you support workers when you propose massive cuts in nutrition programs, including the WIC program designed for low-income pregnant women and their newborn babies. Meanwhile, at the exact same time and within the exact same legislation, as Trump makes massive cuts to life and death programs for millions and millions of children, working people, the elderly, the sick and the poor. At the same exact time, he proposes a budget that over a 10-year period would provide $3 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1%. Trump's budget is the most massive transfer of wealth from working people to the billionaire class that we have ever seen in this country. If you can believe it, he wants to repeal the estate tax, which applies only to the top 0.2%. And that means that while children will go hungry, people will die because they don't have access to health care, the Walton family, a family worth $130 billion, could get up to a $52 billion tax break. What kind of morality is that when you take from the most vulnerable people in this country to give to the very, very richest? And Mr. Trump, we say to you tonight, you are not going to get away with that absurd set of priorities. Further, we have a president who displays every day a massive disrespect for democracy, for tolerance, and for traditional American values. His unprecedented attack against the media is nothing less than an effort to intimidate those who would criticize him and to undermine respect for dissent and a free press. His attacks against the judiciary seek to diminish the separation of powers that our Constitution outlined. The degree to which he tells blatant lies is unprecedented for an American president, and his outrageous claim that up to 5 million people in the last election voted illegally is nothing less than an attempt to tell Republican governors all across this country to accelerate their efforts to suppress the vote. I also find it strange that we have a president who seems to be more comfortable with autocrats and authoritarian politicians than with leaders of democratic nations. All of us are scratching our heads trying to find out, why is Trump so much enamored with Vladimir Putin, a man who has severely repressed democracy in his own country and spent the last number of years trying to destabilize democracy in countries around the world, including our own. Americans are wondering why Trump seems to have such affection for the leaders of Saudi Arabia, a hereditary monarchy which treats women as third-class citizens and which promotes Wahhabism, a radical and extreme version of Islam that has spread throughout the Muslim world. And lastly, in terms of Trump, he is doing what demagogues have done throughout history. And that is, instead of bringing people together to confront the serious problems that we face, what he is doing is trying to divide us up by our religion, by our race, by our gender, or where our families came from. Even a very conservative president, even a very conservative Republican president like George W. Bush, understood that one of the important functions of a leader in a democratic society is to bring people together, not separate them. And I say to President Trump, this country has struggled too long. Too many people have fought, too many people have died, too many people have been beaten, too many people have gone to jail in the fights against racism, sexism, xenophobia, and homophobia. Mr. Trump, we are not going backwards, we are going forwards.